Let's talk about Occupy Wall Street. I witnessed the whole thing. I was working directly across the street at an office building that looked out onto Zuccotti Park. So I was not in it, but I did watch it start. I watched it grow, and then I saw the last days of it, and of course, when afterwards, when Zuccotti Park was cleared. So I have some things to say about it. I can talk about it for you. So, for some of you may remember the Occupy movement and Occupy Wall Street in particular. It was I would say, a broad protest movement that started in 2011. It was against the influence of money in politics, in this situation, American politics. And beyond that, it gets kind of vague what exactly it stood for, what it was fighting for, what it was planning to achieve. And you'll hear that in criticisms of Occupy Wall Street. So I'll start by talking about witnessing it. I started working for an insurance company around that time. I think I had been there. Well, I was in maybe 2009, 2010. I can't remember exactly when I started working for this company. But anyway, our offices were located right there on Broadway, which is a main road in New York City, in Manhattan borough of New York City. This is in Lower Manhattan, in the Wall Street area, or commonly called the financial district of New York City. So this is famously where the stock exchange is, and traditionally was home to many major businesses, corporations, and was known as a center of finance, not just for America, but for the whole world. And this was for a long time. So when people talk about quote unquote Wall Street, the actual Wall Street, where this term comes from, started in this area. Now, I can say I worked in this area from about 2006 to 2013, and I think really its days as the actual like hub or center of finance had kind of already passed by that time. It was, I mean, it has the stock exchange is still there, the Federal Reserve is still there. There's still some presence of it, but I would say by this time, I'm just saying anecdotally, I think a lot of the major corporations and offices and headquarters, the place where finance and business is centered in New York City, we're talking about big business, was more uptown. Well, uptown, that is more in the Midtown area of Manhattan Island. And Wall Street, by this time, I mean, there's a lot of government offices by this time. Of course, the World Trade Center was attacked in 2001, and they were building what's now called the Freedom Tower at this time. There was still a lot of the reconstruction was going on at this time. So really, as far as Wall Street being Wall Street, those days I would say had kind of passed by that time, although it's still an important center of business and finance. Anyway, my company still had its big building there. And, it was business as usual. I kind of had a low-level job for this insurance company. I went to this office building, worked during the day, and went home in the afternoon. And that's pretty much nothing to note, nothing anything anybody would care about. And around this time, we were still kind of only a year or two removed from the big financial crash of 2008 and 2009. So a lot of that was still on people's minds. It wasn't a huge, I mean, there were layoffs in New York City, and New York City was affected by what happened in 2008 and 2009, but it wasn't on the scope as what I've heard in other parts of the United States. But what happened during that time was still on people's minds, and a lot of people saw some or all of the blame as being Wall Street, and especially this was true for people on the more Democrat, left-wing, socialist side of the aisle. So that's kind of the backdrop here at this time and place. But so anyway, I'm just going about my day working, and then all of a sudden I start to see these protests going on. And that's what it was at first, was protests going on in New York City, in Manhattan, and there were some in Brooklyn, I remember, where people, I had heard about these protests before, like in the 90s, we had it in Seattle, these type of activists, left-wing protests, talking about the influence of money in politics and things like that. But for some reason, across the street in Zuccotti Park, it started to become a little more concentrated. Now, Zuccotti Park, it's important that I talk about that. So, like I said, we're in Lower Manhattan. This is very close to where the World Trade Center attacks happened. I'm saying like a couple blocks. Like, actually, it's like very close. Okay, so Zuccotti Park is just kind of like a space, it's like a very small park. So people got to understand that this whole thing took place in a very, very small park. Like, this is the kind of place where the office workers would go sit out for lunch or something like that. There's really no green space in it. It's just kind of concrete or stone, or just stone blocks and things like that. A few trees here and there. I mean, it's very small. I don't know. You can probably look up the square footage or something like that. Anyway, it doesn't have like fences or anything. There's not even a dog park in it, especially at this time. Some of the construction workers, the iron workers that were building the Freedom Tower, a lot of them would sit out there for lunch. There's a little statue of a guy, like a business guy, like in a suit and tie, sitting like on a laptop or something. There's really nothing special about it, and it's a very small space. So that's really what we're talking about. Like, it's like a block. That's it. And it's not really a place where you could see something serious happening. So that's important here. That's really important. And so you're starting to see these protests going on, and you're hearing about them in the news. People talking about the influence of money in politics, kind of what is centering on the inequality and the concentration of wealth with the so-called 1%, that the 1% of the population has so much more wealth than the other 99% of the population. And so you're seeing it now. My memory has faded a lot, of course, because it was some time ago, but just checking the time here. Okay, so it's starting to see like these, after a while, the protests are getting big, and they're getting kind of dramatic, and they're getting attention from the media. And especially you're seeing this in Zuccotti Park. A lot of them are meeting there. And this is I remember, especially the first few days, it did really have like